Welcome to Glimmer Pond, the most beautiful little pond you ever did see. Dragonflies zigzag over sparkling water, frogs doze on mossy rocks, and the air smells of honey and wild mint. Right at the water's edge, a tiny yellow duckling named Pip splashed happily in his rain boots, absolutely convinced that today was going to be a perfectly normal, perfectly boring Tuesday. He was very, very wrong. Pip had woken up extra early that morning with one mission in mind: finding the biggest, bounciest lily pad in the whole pond. He wanted to use it as a raft and float around just like the explorers in his favorite storybooks. His mother had told him to stay close to the willow tree, so naturally Pip wandered straight past it, eyes wide, quacking excitedly to himself. The adventure was already beginning. Benny the beaver was already hard at work in the reeds, gnawing on a fallen branch to build a new dam extension. He had plans, blueprints, and 3 different measuring tapes, none of which agreed with each other. He spotted Pip waddling determinedly through the tall grass and called out a cheerful warning, but Pip was humming too loudly to hear a single word. Benny sighed, tucked his measuring tape away, and decided to follow. Pip's eyes went enormous when he spotted it, a truly magnificent lily pad, easily 3 times his size, bright green with a single pink flower blooming right in the middle. It was floating peacefully just a short paddle away. Pip didn't think twice. He took a running leap, landed smack in the center with a loud splat, bounced once, twice, then sat up beaming as petals rained around him. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. For exactly 30 wonderful seconds, Pip enjoyed his lily pad raft. He stood up tall, spread his tiny wings like a captain, and declared himself the ruler of all he could see. Then a gentle breeze whispered across the pond, and the lily pad, which was not attached to anything at all, began to drift. Slowly at first, then faster. Pip looked back at the shore. It was getting smaller. A yellow tea smaller. Benny burst through the reeds just in time to see Pip floating away at considerable speed. He cupped his paws around his mouth and shouted across the water, but the wind carried his voice in the completely wrong direction. Benny looked left, looked right, and spotted his half-built wooden raft leaning against a rock. It had exactly 2 planks and 1 wobbly wheel. He strapped on his tool belt. It would have to do. Probably. Benny shoved the raft into the water with a heroic grunt. It floated. Barely. One corner dipped immediately below the surface, soaking Benny's left foot. He grabbed a stick from his tool belt to use as a paddle and pushed off from shore with tremendous confidence. The raft spun in a perfect circle 3 times, then bumped straight into a sleeping frog named Gerald, who woke up with an enormous startled croak and leapt into the air. Coral the elderly turtle was sunbathing on her favorite flat rock right in the middle of the pond, a cup of warm chamomile tea balanced on her painted shell. She watched Pip drift past with mild interest and watched Benny spin in circles with slightly less interest. She slowly sipped her tea, blinked twice, and said in her unhurried voice, "That young beaver is going to need help. And probably a better boat." She was absolutely right. A purple blur shot across the sky at roughly the speed of a sneeze. That was Fizz the dragonfly, already mid-sentence before she even landed. Oh. I saw the duckling. He's heading toward Tumble Falls. That's the waterfall. Did you know that? Because I know that. I'm very helpful. Watch me help. She immediately crashed into a cattail, bounced off a lily pad, and zoomed off in the entirely wrong direction, apologizing loudly. Pip had now noticed the distant sound of rushing water, and it was getting louder by the second. The current beneath the lily pad was pulling more firmly, rocking it gently from side to side. He tried paddling with his rain boots but only managed to spin himself around. He could see white foam at the far end of the pond where the water tumbled over mossy rocks. His bottom lip began to wobble. "Benny?" he called. "Benny." Benny had managed to straighten out his raft using a particularly bendy twig as a rudder. It wasn't fast, but it was moving more or less in the right direction. He paddled furiously, tongue out with concentration, tool belt jingling. A jar of wood glue fell overboard. He watched it sink and decided not to mention that later. He could hear Pip calling his name across the water and paddled even harder. "I'm coming, Pip." "Probably." Coral set down her teacup with deliberate care and rose to her 4 feet at a dignified pace. She had already worked out the solution, as she usually did, while everyone else was panicking. The current always curved near the old oak root before the falls, she explained to no one in particular. If something caught the lily pad there, Pip would be safe. She stepped off her rock and slid into the water. Slowly. Very, very slowly. Fizz zoomed back overhead, wings buzzing at extraordinary speed. She had an idea, which was always a slightly alarming development with Fizz. She spotted a long trailing vine hanging from a willow branch overhanging the pond. If she could grab it and stretch it across the current near the oak root, it might stop the lily pad. She zipped toward the vine, misjudged the distance, and accidentally grabbed a sleeping heron's tail feather instead. Chaos ensued immediately. The lily pad was now in the narrow channel that fed Tumble Falls, and the current here was serious business. The water rushed and bubbled around slick rocks, and the roar of the waterfall was loud enough to feel in Pip's tiny chest. He sat down, hugged his knees, squeezed his eyes shut, and did what any brave duckling would do in this situation. He sang his favorite song at the top of his lungs to feel less scared. Coral had reached the old oak root just in time, moving with surprising purpose for a turtle of her age. She wedged herself firmly between the root and a mossy boulder, creating a small but perfectly placed barrier that extended just a little way into the channel. She closed her eyes, braced her shell, and waited. The sound of rushing water and one singing duckling grew closer and closer. Coral took a very deep, very patient breath. Bump. The lily pad caught Coral's shell perfectly, spinning sideways and lodging between the root and the boulder in a froth of white water. Pip's eyes flew open. He looked around wildly. The waterfall roared just ahead, close enough to make his feathers shake, but the lily pad was stuck. Completely, wonderfully stuck. He looked down at Coral's ancient smiling face beneath the water's surface and let out the biggest quack of relief in duckling history. Benny's raft arrived at precisely that moment, riding a side current with what he would later describe as expert navigation, and what everyone else would describe as complete luck. He stood at the front of the raft like a very small, slightly damp captain, arm outstretched. "Pip. Grab my paw," he shouted. Pip stretched as far as his tiny wings could reach, wobbled dangerously, and then their paws and wings met with a satisfying slap. Benny hauled Pip onto the raft with a mighty heave, and they both tumbled backward in a tangled heap of feathers, fur, and tool belt. The raft, now free of the boulder's current, began floating calmly back toward the center of the pond, as if it had planned this all along. Pip sat up, checked that all his boots were still on, they were, then threw his wings around Benny in the biggest hug a duckling had ever given a beaver. Coral pulled herself free from the root and boulder with a slow, satisfied dignity, shaking a small stream of water off her spectacles. She paddled at her own unhurried pace back toward her sunny rock. Fizz, who had finally escaped the disgruntled heron by pretending to be a dragonfly-shaped decorative brooch for a full 90 seconds, came zooming back at top speed. "Did I help? I felt very helpful. I was extremely involved," she announced breathlessly to everyone. The raft drifted gently into the calm center of Glimmer Pond where Coral had returned to her rock and was already refilling her teacup from a small thermos. Fizz landed on Benny's head and immediately slid off. The heron could be seen sulking in the reeds in the distance. Pip looked around at his friends, the brave, the slow, and the chaotically purple, and felt a warmth in his fuzzy chest that was better than any lily pad adventure. Benny steered the raft back to shore with considerably more skill than he'd shown leaving it, though this was mostly because Pip had found a second stick and was paddling enthusiastically from the other side. They hit the bank with a gentle thud and a small victory cheer. Pip stepped off, squelched his soggy boots, and looked back out across the pond. Glimmer Pond sparkled as always, beautiful, peaceful, and full of stories. He was already planning his next adventure. A very tall, very worried mama duck came rushing from behind the willow tree the moment she spotted Pip, her wings flapping rapidly. She scooped him up, checked him over from bill to boot, and then held him very tight for a very long time. Pip told her the whole story in one non-stop quacking rush. She listened to every word, then looked at Benny, Coral, and even Fizz, who crashed into the willow tree on cue, and said thank you. As the sun turned Glimmer upon the color of tangerines and raspberries, The friends spread out a picnic blanket under the willow tree. Benny produced a thermos of hot berry soup from his tool belt. It had been in there all day. Coral contributed biscuits from a tin on her shell. Fizz brought absolutely nothing because she'd forgotten, but kept everyone entertained by zooming in elaborate patterns. Pip laughed so hard that soup came out of his beak. Stars came out one by one over Glimmer Pond. Each one reflected perfectly in the still dark water. Coral dozed on her rock. Benny tinkered quietly with a new raft design that had 4 planks and 2 proper wheels. Fizz slept mid-hover, somehow. And Pip curled up snugly near the willow roots, rain boots still on, already dreaming of tomorrow. Because at Glimmer Pond, with friends like these, every single day was the start of something wonderful.